Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and in this video we are going to do the solo setup for Heroes of Terrinoth. That's right, this one was unboxed earlier into December, and now I'm really excited to sit down and play this one through with you guys. What I'm going to do is I'm going to choose one of the scenarios that came inside of the box. If you haven't seen the contents of the box, definitely go check out my unboxing video. It will also be linked in the playlist of this particular showcase as the very first video. The unboxing for the core game, and now we're going to move into the solo setup where we're going to focus mainly on just setting the game up with no rules explanation whatsoever, and then we'll jump into the playthrough where I'll show you how to play as we learn the game. So let's dig into Heroes of Terrinoth. The very first step of the setup is the choose quest step, and we're going to go ahead and choose a quest by randomly selecting a quest sheet, or maybe just going ahead and choosing one. Now, it's recommended that new players begin by playing the Goblin Problem, but at this particular point, I want to try something a little bit more entertaining for this playthrough, so I'm going to actually choose this one right here, the High Ground. This is the quest that I've chosen to do during this showcase. It's called the High Ground. We're going to talk more about what this card does for us in terms of how it's going to help us during gameplay to understand the victory, defeat conditions, as well as the peril track, and some other things that are really important. But all you need to do for step number one is just choose which quest you'd like to play. I now have flipped over the quest card that we've chosen to focus in on the enemy deck, which is the second step of setup, which is creating that enemy deck. You'll see that dead center on the back side of the card. In order to create this enemy deck, which we'll do in a moment, I'm just going to explain an overview of how this actually happens. So you'll see that there's kind of directional arrows going down throughout these cards shown on screen. And so what you're going to do is be grabbing each of these different sets of cards, putting them into a pile, and then shuffling them up. And then once that's done, you're then going to go ahead and take that pile and you're going to place it on top of the pile below it, which is obviously created, shuffled up, and sitting there waiting as well. Same with this one. And you're essentially just stacking all of these on top of each other, basically creating a staged enemy deck. So one thing to note about this scenario that we're playing through, the High Ground, is obviously the setup is going to be just a tad more involved in terms of going through the trivial, challenging, or formidable sets in order to build out the enemy deck. Now, if you were playing the very first or easiest actual quest, it would have been the Goblin Problem. And as you can see here, it specifies exactly which cards go into that particular deck before they get placed on top of each other. So Goblin Archers, Goblin Witchers, Rat Swarms all get shuffled together and they get placed on top of the Bandits, Cave Spiders, and Orcs. But it's really easy to see that. Whereas with this one, it's a little different because it mentions trivial, challenging, and formidable. So I think it's worth it to talk about what those mean and how to figure out which cards fall into those three different categories. So right now on camera, we have three different sets of enemies at three different difficulty levels. The one on the far left, which is the warrior, the undead minion, has an icon in the very top left-hand corner that kind of looks like a goblin. And basically that means it's a trivial enemy, essentially. And that's what it's categorized as. Now, there is a number of these within this core set, and there's three of them always. There's two that are a regular, and then there's one that's kind of a stronger version of that set of three. So every set of enemies comes in three, but they could be at any one of these different difficulty levels. So we've covered this one here as being trivial for that particular icon. And this one here in the middle that looks kind of like an orc is the changeling card here, and it's a minion, but it has a different icon, and that stands for challenging. So this one is going to be a challenging enemy, which is one step higher up the track of difficulty. And on the far right hand side, we finally have the golem, which is considered a formidable opponent or enemy. And again, three different units there with one that's a little stronger at the back. So hopefully that helps you understand the three different difficulty levels in terms of examples of different sets. Now what we have to do is build three different decks as shown in this High Ground scenario. We have to have three trivial sets in the first one with one challenging set and one formidable set. Now because it doesn't specify what exact enemies those are going to be, we're going to do do this at random. So I'm going to put all of the sets out that are trivial. I'm going to put them face down, and we'll randomly select 3 of them and add them to this first deck. We'll do the next by grabbing 1 challenging set at random and then 1 formidable at random. And we'll have all those sets combined. We'll shuffle them into a deck, and then we'll continue on creating the other ones. Once I do one, you'll get the gist of it, and we'll skip through the other 2, and I'll just basically lay each deck on top of each other until we've staged it correctly. So we have all the trivial enemy sets placed out before us here, all face down in sets of 3. And we're going to take a look at the high ground card here, which mentions how many of these trivial sets should be in each deck. So the first deck should have 3. The second one should have 2, and the last one should have 1. So we'll simply go through these at random and just choose a bunch for each deck and move along. So the very first deck needs 3. So let's go ahead and take 3 at random. Let's take this one here for 1, take this one here for 2, and this one here for 3. That'll start off our first deck. The second deck I needed to have 2 trivial sets, so we'll grab 2 trivial sets just like this. Quick and easy. And then lastly, we need something for the third deck, and that's 1 trivial set based on the quest card. So we'll take this one, and everything else can go back to the game box. All right, this next set is going to be for the challenging sets. So these are kind of the medium difficulty level. For the high ground scenario, you can see here on the sheet that it states that we need to have 1 challenging set for the first deck, 2 challenging sets for the second deck, and 3 challenging sets for the third deck. So let's go ahead and choose those out. So the first one needs 1 challenge set. So we'll take this one right here, add it to the first deck. Then we're going to take 2 challenging sets for the second deck. So I'll take this one and maybe this one here. It's kind of fun actually building these out into stage decks because you have absolutely no idea what you're doing to yourself. And then next up, we're going to do 3 challenge sets into the final deck. So we'll go ahead and grab this one right here. Maybe I'll take this one way up here, and I'll take this one over here as well. And everything else that we don't use can go back to the game box. Now it's time for the nasty set to come in. That's the formidable set, and you'll see that we need 1 formidable set for each of the 3 decks in the high ground scenario. So I'm going to select this one here in the middle for the first deck. We'll take this one for the second, then we'll take this one for the third, and we'll take anything else that is not used in this scenario and put it back in the game box. All right, so now we have our 3 decks set up, and we're going to now stage these decks by stacking them one at a time on top of each other. Now, the one thing I did off camera here is I did shuffle each of these decks together as you're instructed to do in the rulebook. So once you have got, for your first deck, 3 trivial sets, 1 challenging, and 1 formidable set, you shuffle them together, and you follow the same mentality throughout the rest of these 3 decks. Once they're done, the first deck then gets placed on top of the second deck, and the second deck and first deck together get put on top of the third deck to create your final enemy deck. Now, if you happen to have the Heroes of Terrinoth playmat, you can actually use the playmat to stage all of the different items during setup. So for instance, we already chose our quest, so we can actually later when we start gameplay, place our quest just like this. It's actually even got kind of a shadowed area for it. And then on top of that, we also have the enemy section right here for the enemy deck that we just built. And we can go ahead and take that deck and place it just like this. There are different sections on this bat for the NEMESIS layer, the location and exploration. We'll talk about those as we go through the rest of this setup. Now we're going to move along to step number 3, which is creating your location deck. So normally in some scenarios, you're going to shuffle location cards into 1 or more stacks as specified on the back of the quest sheet. Or like for instance, if you're playing the Goblin Problem quest, which is the very first one, it's just 3 different locations stacked 1, 2, 3 on top of each other. But this particular quest is much different because we're playing one a little later on, and it's likely actually quite a bit more challenging, as this particular icon at the top left corner of this particular card even shows the challenging symbol. So we're kind of going midway on this one. So what it says here in the middle is right next to the enemy deck after you're finished creating it, it has which location deck and how you're supposed to build that. But in this particular scenario, we only need 1 card as noted in the special setup instructions that says this archives card is the only location in this quest if there are only 3 heroes in the party, it begins the game with 3 progress on it. If there are only 2 heroes, which is how I'm going to be playing, then it begins with 6 progress. And this is the Wayne Hart Archives. That is the location card we will be having to start with when we begin play. We'll also be putting 6 progress tokens on it, and I'm now going to place this up into the location area on the playmat. So we're now going to go ahead and place that location right like this. The Wayne Hart Archives is now in position, and we've completed step number 3. The next step of the setup is step number 4, which is creating the exploration deck. What we're going to be doing is looking at the keywords beside the exploration deck, because you can see everything's going in order: enemy deck, location deck, and then exploration deck. This is going to specify what needs to be placed inside this exploration deck. So base needs to be on the top, dungeon in the middle, and darkness at the very end. Let's take a quick look at what the exploration cards look like so you can see how we go about building this particular deck. So building the exploration deck is actually really easy, because on the back of the card you're going to see the keywords along the bottom. In the banner it says base, dungeon, darkness. There are other ones that are inside of this game as well. For example, wild is another one that could be used by other scenarios, or village. So basically you're going to take out the ones that don't apply, put the ones into groupings based on the 3 different keywords that you need, and then we're going to be placing them in order. So in this case, the scenario states base first, then dungeon, then darkness. So technically, because these are facing upwards at the camera, base is going to be the first one we go through, then it's going to be dungeon after that, and then darkness after that. And we're going to then flip them over. Now, the one thing you want to make sure of as well is that if you've opened the game for the very first time, that you've actually shuffled those 3 decks so that they're just not in order of printing. So in other words, shuffle the base cards together, shuffle the dungeon cards together, the darkness ones together, and then stage them 1, 2, 3 on top of each other, as I just did here. And then once you've done that, we've got a spot at the very top of the playmat where we can place our exploration cards, which sits right to the left of our location. And while we're up here at the top left-hand corner of the playmat, I'm also going to place now the 6 progress tokens that the special setup instructions instructed me to do. So that's going to be 3 1s I'll place there so that we can easily break them up as necessary, and we'll place a 3 here as well for a total of 6 progress tokens as denoted by the special setup instructions. The 5th step is to prepare the Nemesis. So every quest has a banner with the name of the quest, Nemesis, a powerful foe the heroes are going to have to face, and it's up in the top right hand corner right here. So we're going to go ahead and take the card that matches the name of that. You can see it right there, and we'll place this on the playmat in the Nemesis layer. So the Nemesis layer just sits to the right of the enemy deck, like so, and we now have our Nemesis in place. Step number 6 is going to have us place our quest and peril tokens. So we're now going to put our quest card in the quest slot just like this, and we're also going to grab a peril token and slot it in at the beginning of the peril track. Finally, we'll place the peril token on the start space of the peril track just like this. Step number 7 sees us creating a supply. So we're going to separate the wound tokens, success tokens, and progress tokens, as well as the condition cards, and place them around the game board in easy reach. So I've got my wound tokens here, I've got progress tokens here, and I'm going to put my condition cards out as well as success tokens. The success tokens are going to be kept on the far right hand side of the game board within easy reach. And finally, my condition cards are going to be placed just off to the right of the playmat. We have focused, weakened, and poisoned. The next part of the setup is going to have us moving into step number 8 for choosing our heroes. So I'm playing this solo. I'll be picking 2 heroes to move into this high ground scenario. Now you'll see here there's color-coded differences between these characters. The far left has blue, and these are healers. We have warriors here in the middle in red. We have mages here in yellow, and we have scouts in green. So a number of different classes basically that you can choose from, and then once we actually start breaking out and gaining more abilities later on, we can further diversify those classes. But for this playthrough, I'm going to go ahead with a healer and a warrior. Seems like a decent combination to have one that is more strong in combat and the other to be a support character. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Elder Monk, if I'm saying that correctly. I really want to say monk, but it's muck. So Elder Monk, and I'm going to say, which other one should I choose for a warrior? Let's do Krutz. Let's do this guy right here in the middle. I think he's pretty cool. So we're going to take these two characters. I'm going to show you how to set up your characters from here. Once you've selected your characters or heroes, you're now going to go find the activation cards that line up with the type of character you've chosen. So in this case, it's a warrior here on this left side with the axes as a emblem to signify this individual as a warrior. So you'll go through your cards that you received in the core box and find the backs that look like this. Once you go through those backs of those cards, flip them over and find all cards that say Warrior Basic. There should be 4 of them, and they're all shaded different colors in the primary areas. These are the 4 activation cards you're going to be able to use with your particular character. Same thing goes for the healer, which is blue and uses this hand icon looking like it's healing. Find the backs that match that particular icon, and again, make sure that it says Healer Basic on the bottom of the cards, and you've got the correct activation cards. Now we're going to move into step number 9, which is choosing the party leader. And I'm going to have Krutz, my warrior, be the party leader because I believe it just makes sense to have him be the focal point, knowing that my healer can hopefully heal him from a distance. So we're going to take this nice fancy first player token and put it right next to our party leader. Next, you want to find the player count cards and basically dole these out based on the player count being played. So in my particular situation, I'm controlling 2 characters. So because of that, you can see there's 2 meeples here. I'm going to be using these. So this is basically going to balance the game out, and it's going to allow me to give one of these to each of the heroes that I'm controlling, because I'm controlling 2. It's going to, during the hero phase, give my hero an extra activation. I'm allowed to activate twice. The only stipulation with that is I have to alternate those activations between my 2 heroes. I can't have the same hero take an activation twice in a row. The other huge benefit that I get is this plus 10, which again will actually boost up the total health that I have in general for my hero. So now my hero is going to go up to 24 health, which is quite a bit more, and that's how you counteract or balance out the game based on the number of heroes that you're controlling. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side to the healer. Finally, for step number 10, we're going to reveal the first location and spawn enemies. Now this is very, very different in this scenario because we learned earlier that there is only one location. So there's a little bit of a trick here in this setup that's not going to describe fully what you would do, but I'll just talk you through what you would do if you actually had a location deck that was stacked up with multiple locations and you flipped and revealed the first one. In this case, I'm only at one location for the entire duration of this scenario, so I don't need to flip anything. And as this actual high ground scenario stated in the special instructions, enemies are going to be none and exploration is none. Now, what is that referring to? It's referring to these little numbers right here in the bottom left-hand corner. At this particular time, if you were playing a different scenario, you would reveal a location card and look at those 2 numbers, and you would take a look at the 2, which is in red, and that's the number of enemies that you would reveal, and they would become engaged with, starting with the first player, one of those enemies, and then the other player for the other enemy. And then over here, you have 3, which are basically in the shadows. What in the shadows mean is those cards are basically face down in a row in the center of the playmat, and you don't know what they are. So that's the staging and kind of setting up and spawning of the enemies typically. But for this scenario, we are not going to do that because this one is going to play out much differently. The reason this scenario is so much different than some of the other scenarios where enemies would come at you out of the gate from that step 10 of the setup, in this one, as the peril track moves throughout the different stages, different peril events are going to occur, which are going to cause enemies to come out of the gates at us. So essentially, we are kind of hunkered down in these archives, trying to ward off from high ground the enemies that are coming at us. We'll talk more about that when we get into the very first part of the playthrough. This is a very different scenario than what you would encounter playing the Goblin Problem, which is the very, very first scenario. But I did want to explain, at least in terms of engagement and shadow, how that works with the numerical values in the bottom left-hand corner of location cards and how much different it truly is with this scenario that I'm playing right now, where that really isn't used. So that is actually going to conclude the setup. The only thing that remains is just to get the dice out within easy reach. reach. Besides that, we're ready to go. And that's going to do it, guys. That is going to conclude the solo setup for Heroes of Terrinoth, the high ground scenario. I'm really excited to dive into this one with you guys. Think you'll really enjoy it. So stick around. We'll be jumping into part 1 very, very soon. Thanks so much for your support. If you saw anything I missed or would like to make any questions or comments, please do so in the comments section below. I would love to hear from you. And as always, keep on rolling solo.